and welcome to another edition of the Crotchety Old Men Podcast. Today, folks, we got a special edition of the Crotchety Old Men Podcast here on Martin Luther King Day. And I thought it would be really special to have a different guest on and kind of touch on a different subject. So today it is my pleasure to introduce Angela McCullough. She's joining us here from Atlanta, and she is currently an executive in the public sector, government agency. And she's written a book called Beyond Gender and Ethnic Stereotypes. And I thought here on Martin Luther King Day, with all the talk about DI and things like that, this would be a great discussion to have. So, Angela, without further ado, welcome to the program. How you doing?
I'm doing well, and I'm excited and looking forward to having this chat with you.
Well, good. Um, let's start off there. I mean, like I said, being Martin Luther King Day, a lot of things come to my mind. Being raised in that generation, my parents actually in the same neighborhood as Martin Luther King. So I guess my understanding and of him is a little bit different and what he stood for. I know there's the public perception, but when we start talking about DEI, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion, what does that really mean to you?
Mm, great question on this particular day. Um, I think what those three letters mean is that the playing field is level for folks that have historically been marginalized, right? That the playing field's level for everyone. That you can show up and you can compete fairly and in an unbiased way that allows the cream of the crop, if you will, to rise to the top. And I think, though words have mattered and there's been intentionality over these last couple years with particular focus to really change the narrative of what those mean, to suggest that they're reverse racism and all of that, I think they come from a place that acknowledges the turbulent and just racist history in the country. And the fact that when you look at non dominant culture individuals, they have not always been welcomed to the tables, invited in, and had opportunities. And so I think at the end of the day, that's what DEIA was really all about.
Interesting enough to me is that and I'm going to probably keep referring back to ML King as we have the discussion. A lot of people think that his whole thrust was just for, black folk. But, if you really take an understanding of what he talked about, he talked more so about poor folk. And that could mean black, white, whatever. Okay.
Mhm.
It was interesting when he was in the Birmingham jail, he talked about, he looked at the guards and said, well, heck, you guys need to come join and march with us because you're really no different than us. You're still poor and underprivileged. So, and I think a lot of people miss that point. But, and here again, keeping it 100, DEI has been weaponized. Okay.
Yes.
Those words have been weaponized. So now, people look at it in a different way and make it feel like they're giving an unfair advantage to folks, and it's really not. It's really being inclusive. And here again, that's what we should be about in the business world, is about being inclusive. And I know you've had a pretty interesting journey through through America. I'm not going to say corporate America, it's more so the public sector.
Right.
My challenge was a little different. Mine was through corporate America, but being a black man, I still had some challenges. And reading your book, there were a lot of things that you associated with that I could associate with also. But talk to me. Tell me why you decided to write this book, Beyond Gender and Ethnic Stereotypes.
So I think a lot of those things in the book are universal. right? As you said, as a Black man reading the book, you could relate to the stories. Of course, in my book, I chose to center it in the public sector because oftentimes we only hear about the corporate world. And we forget about those of us working in the public sector are servants serving the American people, the taxpayer and the American people. And many of us are in those positions. And back when MLK was alive, we didn't have those opportunities. We were not even in those public sector positions, or as people like to say, our good government jobs, right? We did not have those. And so as I found that there seemed to be silence in terms of talking about women in those spaces. And as you said, I've had over a 30-year, actually it's coming up on 35-year career that started in the military and then into the public sector. And as you read the book, and I talk about what I was faced with when I walked in the door. And at the time, DEI was not a word or were not letters that were being volleyed around, but what it was talking about affirmative action. And that was how I was colored as an affirmative action hiree. That was just what the picture was, that I was a number, that I was a statistic, and that I was simply there because I fit this narrow box of being a Black woman, and I happened to be in the military. And then throughout my career, I reflected in many spaces that I was the only one in that space. And I can remember different times of making intentional decisions to try to fit in with more dominant cultures so that I could be respected. And even at this year in 2025, many of those challenges still exist. And the more promotions I had in my career, the less and less people of color in general, particularly women of color, and specifically Black women, they were not in those spaces. And so I thought, well, who's telling their stories? Who is talking about what it takes to survive in that environment? The other reason why I wrote the book is because I believe that it is necessary for more of us to be in these spaces and to um, move into key decision making positions, to have the opportunity to change policy, right? To be
Mhm.
seen. And I know for a fact that you need to see people in these positions because that encourages you. Like once you saw me there, you knew, like, I'm not special. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? But so if I can do it, you can do it. And so it was also a way of sharing that information and celebrating the successes of those women. So that's why I wrote it. I tell a story in the book in the day I wrote it, the day it just hit me that I needed to talk about it. And at the time, I was in a incredibly senior position where I had 30,000 people working for me in the organization. And I was preparing for an upcoming speaking event, and I was going to be addressing one of our employee organizations, and it happened to be a Black organization. And I was looking at our statistical numbers, right? Just looking at, okay, here we are,
Mhm.
this large organization. And when I looked at the numbers, particularly of women of color and then Black women, I thought, oh my gosh, it was a gut punching moment, even though you know it,
Mhm.
but actually looking at the numbers, and I'm not going to tell the numbers because that might make people go pick up the book to say, well, wait a minute, well, what were the
Well,
numbers?
actually, I read that section. I think the number was like 934, something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
out
yeah,
of 30,000. So
yeah.
you look at the percentage of that. And I thought, wow, we really have a problem. What is going on here? And this is ridiculous. So it put me on this journey to go and seek out women from across multiple public sector spaces to hear their story, to understand how do they do it, kind of understand what did they face, and then how did they overcome those things, and then what can we teach others to hopefully help them on their journey?
And that's where I want to kind of go with our discussion today, is kind of what you've learned, and some of the things that others can take along with that. But before we go there, there's a couple of things you talk about in the book, which I think are pretty interesting. One was you talked about your grandparents wanting to buy some property and I'll say upper Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us that story. I thought
Yes,
that was a real interesting story, and tell me how that story affected your life.
very interesting. It's funny that you say that because I just recorded a video about that very story
Okay.
about a week or two ago. And so my grandparents wanted to purchase some property in northern Michigan, and at in that era, which had to be in the, let me think, I'm looking at my age, probably the 60s.
Okay.
And they were met with people unwilling to even show the property. I will say, for people who don't know, Upper Michigan is a rural area, beautiful wilderness country, not a very diverse environment at all, and especially in that era. And they were drawn to that, and so they kept running up against these, no, people not interested, wouldn't sell, simply because they were Black. It wasn't because they didn't have the money and all of that. Because it's very interesting. We found, because they have since passed, but we found their initial like past savings book,
Mm,
and these were people who were about saving their money and that type of thing. So it was none of that type of issue. It was simply because they were Black, and so that it was closed to them. They ended up meeting a man there that, interestingly enough, he himself was an immigrant
mm,
to the United States, and he was a farmer. And they ended up befriending him. And in the course of conversation, they were talking to him about their desire to purchase this land and what they wanted to do. And he agreed to be front their front man, if you
mm,
will.
mm,
And obviously, he was a white man, and because of him, he like worked the deal and all of that type of thing. They were able to get this beautiful piece of land, acreages of beautiful, pristine land in northern Michigan. And the reason that story sticks with me so much is for a couple different reasons. He was an ally, truly an ally, who obviously this man didn't care about the color of their skin or any of that. And he was willing to sort of work outside. He worked inside and outside the system on behalf of
mm,
them to allow them to get the land. I think one reason that really resonates with me and has impacted me is it is a form of resilience.
mm,
It is a form of them being determined and having a made up mind and not allowing others, all the no's, to stop them from having what they wanted. And so people could tell them no, but it didn't stop them on their path. And their continued quest allowed them to get what they ultimately wanted. Same thing for me. Well, is it really no? I mean, no does mean no, but I've learned in at
mm,
least, business, no sometimes means no for now, not right now, or maybe no in the way in which you want to approach it, but
mm.
maybe a different approach can get you to a different outcome, to a yes. And I learned that from that one incident, or that one story, and it's had an impact on my life.
And that's interesting. And I guess for me, there's a couple of things that go through my mind. And being here again in the public sector or in corporate America, you're not going to see many Black folk. Okay, so but you need that mentor, you need that sponsor. So with that story, and I guess it goes back to trust and not getting into a situation where, I'm not going to associate with white folks. I'm not going to allow them to, stifle. I'm going to do this on my own. But did that story have anything to do with how you approached your work environment? And I'm going to go to one particular story you also tell, and I'll just call him Jeff. You know what I'm talking about?
I mean, it was a Jeff that was in there.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So, all right. So I mean, here again, this is a white guy.
Yep.
So here again, talk about how, and tell me if one situation had something to do with another, because I know, we have a certain perception of the world, um, and it's not ever going to be all black. It's not going to be all white. I'm just going to lay it on the table. For me, it's not a black white situation. It's a class situation, you know,
Mm.
for me. Okay. And it's, and hear people say, well, money's green regardless, but you still have to have morals, and you still have to have, about yourself. You have to be about yourself. Okay. You can't lower yourself, your standards. You still have to have that.
Yes.
So I'm going to let you tell your story. So tell me how, if there's any correlation between that story and about Jeff.
So I won't say exactly that story, but let me say, I think my upbringing, because they were able to purchase this land and build this beautiful home, because I'm a city girl through and through, a Detroit native,
Mm,
and that was where I was raised. But because of them having that property, I got exposed. Right.
mhm,
For us, it wasn't just, for a lot of people, they live in a bubble, and
mhm,
in that bubble, and you think about it, you live in a bubble. If you go to church, you go to school, all of those things are in that bubble. And a lot of times that bubble does not have diversity. And to your point, even if it's class, if you poor, you live with poor people. If you
right,
have money, you live in environments where you have money.
right,
And if you are black with money, your environment probably doesn't have a ton of black people in it.
right.
But, and so I think it was their early exposure. One thing about my grandparents is, I would say, they saw people as people. Now, they
Mhm,
were very clear. There is a color line, and the things that you talk about, and some experiences that they shared, but people were people. And so they gave us a different type of exposure, particularly in northern Michigan, where we were able to have friends with people who had property on the lake and lake houses and boats and things. And then also people who were, I would say, somewhat, they were farmers.
mhm,
And in those farmers, I would say people would probably even say maybe poor farmers. Okay.
mhm,
And so I went into the world with the people are people, with an understanding that it's all different types of people, but I
mhm,
try to approach it with the people as people are people. I got into the work environment and was in a space where predominantly with white men who hadn't worked with non-white people, and then definitely hadn't worked with not even white women, and then much less a black woman coming in. And I was cognizant and aware that I was different, and that wasn't necessarily in an environment that was particularly inviting and warm and fuzzy. And but I knew, and I might have even said it in the book, like, okay, I have to work with these people, so I got to figure out how to get what I need so that I can be successful. And so I that was my approach throughout my career. Jeff, I met him early in my career, and we sort of watched each other's careers. And I mean, he retired last fall, but we watched each other's careers. And I would say he was a people are people person as well. But I also saw that Jeff had a willingness to understand more than people are people. And what I mean by that is we had conversations about um, things like white privilege and what does
Mhm.
that mean? And talking to him about certain things like microaggressions and, if you can't ask Black woman, can you touch her hair? He was a person that was just willing to try and understand things. And he was a voracious reader. So he would go and read like, hey, maybe you need to read this book. And then as he would read different things, he would turn me on to different books. So he was an individual that had an expansive mind and a willingness to learn. And I think because he was a people are people and he was willing to try and understand life through someone else's lens, it made it much easier for him to be able to maybe put his preconceived notions or biases aside and try to work with people. And we ended up working very well together. I hate the fact that he retired because we taught a class together, two
Mhm.
different types of energy, but a lot of respect. And what I will tell you is I believe that it's going to take those types of relationships to begin to change the world when you can have an honest conversation. I mean, because he pushed back on white privilege, like, what are you talking about? Okay, well, let's talk about it. And then he went and read about it and said, oh, okay, I understand that. Those are such emotional and charged types of discussions because
Mhm.
most of the time when you're talking about that type of stuff, you are hitting up on people's belief system and it is very hard to have a conversation. So indirectly, it got me here, but more it was that what that door opened for my grandparents
Mhm.
opened this other pathway for
Mhm.
me that has, I think, served me.
That's good. Yeah, I mean, that's we have to have an open mind, especially when we're in an environment, and that's so important that we um, diversification. I mean, I talk about that a lot as we talk about our financial world, but you also have to have diversification in your life as far as different people, different situations. I encourage people to travel a lot, so that you can see what other people in different countries are doing. And then it all comes back to, what we do on a day to day basis. In this case, it's we got to work. So we want to be in a situation. I mean, when at the end of the day, we spend more time at work than we spend probably anywhere else, and we probably
Yes.
spend more of our life working, for somebody else, unless we're fortunate to have our own business, than doing anything else. So that's good. That's a good learning lesson. I hope my audience can understand that. Where you have to be well rounded, and you can't put up roadblocks just because of stereotypes and because of the fact that they don't look like you. All people aren't bad people. All people aren't good people. You have to figure out who's the ones that are going to help you.
Hmm.
So moving on, you, you also talk about hair in the book. I read the book.
Yes, you
I
did.
read the book. Okay.
Yes.
So, I thought that was interesting because here again, being in corporate America for over, good Lord, almost 50 years before I retired, it's something I guess from a black man's perspective, I guess I looked at it differently. And I never really thought of it being basically as an issue. And I guess you looked at it differently too. So let's talk about that chapter you devoted to about hair.
I am not the only Black woman that has looked at it differently because if
Yeah.
I was, Black women's hair has been politicized. Period. End of story. When you have to try to get legislation
Mm-hmm.
to protect hair, there is a problem there. We go back to, in America, what is considered beautiful, what is considered attractive, and what is considered professional. And they tend to be identities of whiteness,
Mm-hmm.
right? Straight hair, even many men, Black men, won't wear mustaches and beards and whatnot. If you go and look at them in the yeah. Okay. So I guess black women's natural hair, the way that it grows out of her head, has been characterized as unattractive, nappy, kinky, and not professional. Period. So I've certainly had my shares of relaxers. Your audience will know it was wrapped and swinging in the wind. And all of that. And nothing wrong with that. It's personal choice. And that's what we want, is the choice to decide about our hair and not to be stereotyped and categorized based on my hair. So somehow, and I'm sitting here, I mean, you can see me, but I know this is an audio podcast. My hair is now micro locked. Won't be going anywhere. It's 250 micro locks in my hair. And many people consider that unprofessional, because micro locks is it's my natural hair that is locked in, it's in this particular state, but it's not straight, it's not shiny. And the narrative is that our braids and twists or choice of afros is not professional. And so we have spent a lot of time at Black women dealing with our hair in a way to be accepted in the environment. I remember, because this is my second go around, I had traditional locks like 25 years ago. And I can remember the anguish that I was feeling about the choice to wear my hair in this type of way. How would I be accepted in this all male environment? And it was an all white male environment. One Black man was in there with me. And I can remember literally wearing head wraps. No, those weren't considered professional either, but that was a little bit more acceptable than these twists in my head. And oh my gosh, I just remember the pain the personal struggle that somehow this choice would impact my ability to move forward. And that is still a real thing now. And your audience will talk about how many times the comments are made, oh, you changed your hair, because Black women, like, look, hair is fashion. It is an accessory. And so if you color it, if it's twisted, if you have a weave, if you have braids, whatever you do to your hair, it seems to be this whole fascination that people have. Oh, your hair. Oh, your hair is so nice. And the big thing, can I touch your hair? No, ma'am
No.
or sir, you may not touch my hair. But I talk about it. Here's why I talk about it. It's not for the sake of hair itself. It's for the sake of, when you're in these environments. And in my book, I interviewed every woman in there is or was an executive woman that had this journey into this executive space. And the most effective leaders in their space are people that are wholly comfortable in who they are. They know what they stand for. They understand their values and their belief system. And if you are twisting yourself into knots to fit into this box that is not you, that does play out in the workplace, because you have your own set of fears and concerns, and all of this other churn is going on inside of you to be respected for what you bring to the table. And it impacts how you deal with other people and even how you see yourself. So we needed to talk about that. And I'm empowering women to show up in ways that they feel comfortable, and understand that sometimes in your environment, there's going to be some challenges with people accepting that. And you've got to know that and understand that and be prepared to deal with that if it's that important to you, or move into another environment.
Just to add on to this video, it will be video for this podcast.
Oh, I didn't know that. I mean, I see you. I didn't know that you switched the video, but that's good. So they can see me with my locks and
Yes,
all of that. So it's all good.
yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes. So we'll have both. So it'll be
Okay,
good.
great.
It'll be good. So
Yes.
I talked a little at the beginning about my journey through corporate America. Like I said, there was a lot of things that you talked about in the book um, that I kind of associate with or relate to. So, from your perspective, how do you see the experience being different than a black man in corporate America? If you can kind of address that.
Yes. I certainly there are similarities. And then I would have to say there are differences. It's really interesting. Sometimes I think that black men get the kinship of being male with white men. There's still patriarchy, and black men are, part of that patriarchy. So I think there is some kinship that is there. But at the same time, I'm going to tell you that I believe that it is a bit easier for black women.
Mm,
I think that for black men, when you talk about black men and white men, I think that white men sometimes see black men as a threat. And
mhm,
so sometimes they would be willing to give me a chance
mhm,
that maybe they would not give to a black man. So we have similar types of, microaggressions. There's similar types of biases that we share as black people, and just some stereotypes in America that are so pervasive that people act like they're fact. Like it's a known fact. I've
mhm,
read this in the Bible and it said right. And so they don't even question it. And so some of that I think does come up to play. In my environment, when I reflect on my environment, I would definitely say in my experience, I've had some more doors open that I did not necessarily see for black men. I don't know if it was simply because who I was, how I was showing up, how I was, accomplishing work, or if I just wasn't seen as a threat. And
mhm,
so, hey, you're not a threat, so I can go ahead and open the door and let her in, into the table.
mhm. Interesting. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I can associate with both of those things you're saying because, like you say, sometimes black men are seen as a threat, and then sometimes they're welcomed in. Uh, come on, let's go play golf, or come on, let's go smoke a cigar, or something like that. Drink after work, or something like that. So yeah, I can see that. But interesting.
Can I say more about that? And you're right,
Sure.
we don't get invited to those things. But on the rare event that we in the on the rare chance that we do get invited, oftentimes we won't show up. And that is a problem
Hmm.
for us. As you just finished saying, I know, you're a golfer, and how many conversations take place on the golf course?
Hmm.
Or when you get out of the office and, go have an after work drink. Sometimes that's where you get a bit of insider knowledge, right? Because the reality of it is, in these spaces, the movers and shakers are white men. Those are who's at the top of most every organization. And so they have insight into vacant positions, whether a new business arm is
Hmm.
going to come in, who's going to be retiring, a new project, like different types of things. And sometimes the only way that you get on their radar, that they even know that you exist, if you don't have a sponsor, is sometimes by that conversation, that or going and to the charity golf event. You may not be able to golf. You may
Hmm.
think that golf sucks. You don't like golf attire.
Yeah.
You get invited, Sometimes you have to put yourself out there and put yourself into some different situations that you normally, maybe aren't comfortable with in order to meet. Because people always say, well, how do you find it? Where do you find these mentors? How do you find a sponsor? And okay, well, if your head is always down and you're just doing your work, yeah, I wish we lived in a world where we could just say, hey, my work speaks for itself. And it should, but you've also got to be able to advocate for yourself. And that happens when you're willing to um, build some relationships. So I need your audience. You can't just always go home from work. If you get invited out to something, sometimes you have to show up. Yeah, I'm not. And if it's a drink event, look, if you don't want to drink, get you some seltzer water at the bar. Sip one glass of wine all night long. Never put yourself in a compromising position, but show up and be sociable.
Good stuff. Yeah. So that kind of leads us to, where I wanted to kind of go with the conversation, because you've talked about, in your book, you talk about unequal pay, you talk about sexism, gender stereotypes, but share with us, our audience now, what have you learned, and what do you want to share with those women that are currently climbing the executive staircase, whether in corporate America or in the public sector? What can they take away from this interview, and then also from the book, to help them? Because that's what we're all about on the Crotchety Old Men, is giving them opportunity and exposure. And today, hopefully, it exposes them to a woman who has, actually done it, climbed the corporate ladder in the public sector, has been and is successful, and will continue to be successful. So share with my audience, some of the tidbits and some of the nuggets, as we say, they can take with them.
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, let me just say, do not let them gaslight you. Whatever you are experiencing and what you are going through is real for you. And a lot of times we are in environments and we want to talk about the challenges that we are having, and folks are trying to make you think you are crazy. So I'm here to tell you are not crazy. I'm going to say that the set of isms that that exist are real, and that there are spaces that literally are not welcoming. So I think you have to understand and know all of that. That's just what it is. Now, what do you need to do? Number one, it really does come down to tremendous amount of self-awareness. Like I said it earlier, understanding and knowing who you are. What are your values? What is your belief system? Number one, because if you have a value and belief system that is, God, family, travel, and blah, 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 and you're working in a company or organization that belief system is a misalignment, there's going to be challenges there for you. You're never going to feel comfortable in that environment because it doesn't align with who you are. One of the biggest things we have to learn how to do is learn how to effectively communicate in these environments. And if you know what you know and things that you are going to face in the environment, how do you handle them? When the hair, can I touch your hair? This is not the time for sapphire and attitude and head twisting. It is the time for having the ability to confidently say, I prefer not. However, thank you for the comment, and move on. And so learning how to identify the spaces that when you're facing biases, how to deal with the situation when you are being overtalked. We all know we put an idea out there, and then Ted takes that idea and suddenly it's the greatest thing. How do you reframe that in the moment to say, thank you, Ted, for restating what I said earlier? Let me expand on that idea, right? So it is the emotional intelligence of knowing that these are challenges that we are going to face. And they are not an excuse, and don't get to be an excuse from you fully living into what you've been asked to do, called to do, or the career that you want. It is recognizing all the types of things that we're going to face and then preparing yourself ahead of time. I'll tell people, and my sister would tell you, if I had to have a difficult conversation, I used to practice in the mirror. It works. Something as simple as, I need to address this. Let me practice this in the mirror. How do I maintain the tone of my voice? How do I maintain the look in my face to deal with this emotionally charged situation, right? So it is really all about how to communicate in these environments and not allowing all of the stuff going on to deter you. Delivering with excellence. Period. End of story. Show up and deliver. And then once you show up and deliver, because like I said, your work won't speak for itself, learn how to express how you have delivered in a meaningful way, right? Back at that table where you're advocating for yourself, hey, I'd like to take that project on. If you recall, XYZ project, I completed it on time. We had a 20% increase. We this and we that. We've got to get comfortable with articulating our successes in a way because, we were taught, we don't boast, we don't brag. And that is a challenge that we have, is that we're uncomfortable expressing our accomplishments. You have got to have a network around you. I say a board of directors. And as we talked about Jeff, he was one of my board of directors. Your board of directors needs to be a mix of people. It needs to be some people who can absolutely relate to you in terms of the skin that you're in, your background and that type of thing. You need people who have a different background, different skill set, different upbringing. And these are relationships that you cultivate with people that you can call. I, to this day, can pick up the phone and have some people to say, hey, I need to do a sanity check. This is what's going on. This is what I'm thinking. And these are people who are not going to simply agree with you to agree with you. These are people who are going to say, ma'am, have you lost your mind? You can't do that, And so cultivating that board of directors is critical. And then I'm going to talk specifically to the Black women that are listening to your podcast. You need a sister circle. And what I mean by that is a circle of women. It'd be nice if you have some colleagues that are similarly situated as you are, so you can have that conversation with them, but you need others that are in there that you all can really come together and you can have honest conversations. You all can share with one another and you all can learn from one another. Sometimes that's hard to do when you're the only one in your environment to go out and seek and to find that. And then the big thing that we don't really talk about, and I talk about it at the end of the book, and every woman in the book ended up talking about how a sponsor played a critical role in her life. And so your mentors are those people who are going to help you understand the business, the politics, and those things going on in the environment. They are critical because they can help you with the unspoken and the unwritten rules of the game in the environment. Allies, and I'm not talking about performative allyship, I'm talking about those individuals who literally are working from the inside out to change the system. So you need the allies, but the sponsors, those are the game changers in the room. Those tend to be the most experienced and the most senior individuals in the organization. Typically, they are white men, but there are, white women, Black, there are others that are there. And the sponsor is the person who really can open that door for you. They are that individual that's willing to speak your name in a closed door meeting. Oftentimes for us, we don't get to meet them. We're just not in those circles in our positions where we meet these individuals. That's why you got to go and network a little bit. This is why you have to do things like as you're on your career journey. And that's why you've got to enter into some of the leadership development programs so that you have the opportunity to meet some of these individuals. And sometimes these folks will end up starting out mentoring you, and you're learning from them and you build that mentor relationship. And it can pivot to a sponsorship when they see how you deliver, what you deliver, the quality of your work. And they can not only speak your name into a closed door room, they can open a door for you. Sometimes they can create a door that doesn't exist. And the critical thing is sponsors are willing to use some of their political power for you. And that makes a huge difference. And so please stop telling yourself you don't need anybody. Please stop telling yourself that you can do it all. Please stop telling yourself that your 12 degrees and all of your alphabets and your hard work should be enough. I agree with you. However, I am telling you, it is not.
True, true, true. Very true. Very true. Very true. Very well spoken. Hey, this has been a great interview. Really enjoyed it. Hopefully, I took you in some directions that some of your other conversations and interviews about the book have not. So, because I think I've kind of opened up some things for you. But here again, thank you so much for coming on the show. To my audience, make sure you go out and get a copy of Beyond Gender and Ethnic Stereotypes by Angela McCullough. And, keep supporting us and keep supporting everything else. So anything else you want to share with the audience before we sign off? Or
No, I just want to say thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be on your podcast and in front of your folks. And I do think it is fitting on this MLK Day that I had the opportunity because I like him. People are people, right? We are here having a human experience. And so I help all kinds of people. I mean, you hear me talk a lot about Black women. That is ultimately who I spend the most time with. But I've expended time with all people. And so, yeah, it is my joy to be here. So thank you for having me.
all right. Also, we got to plug your podcast.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Yeah, come on
Yes,
now.
yes.
We're supporting each other here.
Yes, we are. Thank you so much. The podcast, wow, after I completed the book and I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even get to put all of the stories in the book. I landed on something and I thought, oh, why don't I continue this on in a podcast of interviewing women? And the podcast is about amplifying, inspiring, and educating all women. And now it's not just women in the public sector. It is it's all women. So business leaders that have gotten to the top and financial and just all wellness, just all types of things to really support women and to give them a space to see other women and to amplify voices of women that are making a difference. And so the podcast right now, it's a video podcast. And so you can catch it on, you can catch me on you can catch me on YouTube. And all of a sudden it's crazy. I almost just drew a blank on my own doggone, on my own podcast.
Okay.
Isn't that crazy? Isn't that ridiculous? But
Okay.
anyway, it's the Beyond Gender podcast, and you can catch me on YouTube, and I hope to see you there.
Good, good, good. All right, super. So wrapping up, we always wrap up with a quote. And I thought a quote from Martin Luther King would be appropriate for today. And the quote goes like this: if you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But whatever you do, you have to keep moving forward. And I think that's what it's all about. You got to keep moving forward. And as we always say on the Crotchety Old Men Podcast, if you didn't know, now you know. Take care. Be blessed. Thanks a lot.